It was just past midnight when I stood at the top of the staircase, the scent of rain soaked earth drifting in through the open window, mixing with the bitter sting of betrayal. The house was dark, silent, too silent. I could hear the tick of the old grandfather clock in the hallway like a war drum, measuring the seconds between the moment my daughter looked me in the eye and shattered what was left of my heart. Either serve him or leave. Mama, that's what she said. Her voice was calm, too calm, as if she'd rehearsed it, as if every syllable hadn't just carved another scar into my chest. I stared at her, this grown woman I'd raised with trembling hands and prayers whispered into the night. The same little girl who used to cling to my skirts, call me her hero, her only friend when the world seemed too big and too cruel. She stood next to her husband, Mark, his arms folded across his chest, eyes filled with the smug confidence of a man who thought he'd won. And maybe he had. Maybe for a moment he had. But then I smiled. It wasn't the polite smile of surrender or the broken one of defeat. No, it was the quiet, dangerous smile of someone who has finally remembered who she is. I turned, walked to my room, and pulled out the old suitcase from beneath my bed. It still smelled faintly of lavender and sandalwood. I packed slowly, deliberately, each item folded with care, as if I were wrapping up not just clothes, but memories. The silk scarf from my mother. The photo of me and Lena at the beach. The journal I hadn't opened in years. I didn't say a word as I walked past them with my suitcase in hand. Not even when Lena said my name, softer this time. Almost a whisper. Almost regret. I closed the door behind me and stepped out into the night, the cold wind cutting through my sweater, but I didn't shiver. My hands were steady, my steps sure. I had walked away from worse. Much worse. My name is Amar, I'm 56 years old. And what I walked away from that night wasn't just a house. It was the last thread of an illusion I had clung to for far too long. You see, I was a mother before I was anything else. Lena was born when I was 19. Her father, Karim, was already gone by the time she turned 3, vanished in a whirlwind of debts and shame, leaving me alone in a tiny apartment with a toddler and a heart full of rage. But I survived. I stitched clothes for long hours in a basement shop, taught myself to cook from scraps, and somehow made Lena believe the world was beautiful. She believed it so much, she married a man who promised her everything. Mark came into our lives like sunshine after a storm. Handsome, charming, successful. At first, I wanted to believe he was her reward. All the suffering, the hard years. I thought maybe God was finally balancing the scales. But Mark wasn't sunshine. He was a mirror. He reflected every ounce of insecurity Lena had buried under her beauty and ambition. Slowly, he chipped away at her confidence, her independence, her fire. She began to dim like a candle struggling against the wind. And she resented me for seeing it. That resentment grew into coldness. Then cruelty, until the day she told me I could stay if I would agree to serve him. As in, cook his meals, clean his shoes, answer to his whims like some servant in my own daughter's house. I never thought she'd choose him over me. But sometimes, the people we love most are the ones who bury the knife the deepest. A fear I went to stay with my old friend, Rashida. A woman with the kind of spine forged in fire. We'd met in our 20s, bonded over heartbreak and ambition. She never married, never had children, but she built a life so rich and wild it made most envy her freedom. Her home smelled of cardamom and incense, filled with art and loud laughter and cats that claimed every sun-drenched corner. "You've been sleeping in a stranger's house for years," she said when I told her everything. "Now you're just finally free of it." But freedom, I learned, isn't always a gift. Sometimes it's a test. The days that followed were hard. Not just practically. I had no job, no income, no clear plan, but emotionally. The silence gnawed at me. I missed the sound of Lena humming in the kitchen, even if she barely spoke to me anymore. I missed the comfort of routine, even when it had become a cage. Then came the call that cracked the silence. Mom. It was Lena. Her voice brittle, like frost on glass. Mark's in the hospital. Stroke. I felt nothing at first. Then a strange twist in my gut. Grief. Relief. I didn't know. Do you want me to come? I asked. She paused. Then, softly, please, I went. Mark looked smaller in the hospital bed, his face slack, one side drooping, eyes unfocused. A machine beeped beside him, steady and mechanical. He was no longer the man who had stood beside my daughter like a god. He was just a man, fragile, mortal. Lena sat slumped in the corner, mascara smudged, hands clenched in her lap. He can't move his right side, she said. He might not speak again. For a moment I saw her as a little girl again. Not a wife, not a stranger, just my child, scared and broken. I don't know what to do, Mama. I sat beside her, and for the first time in a long time, I took her hand. You breathe, and then you do the next right thing. She leaned into me, sobbing, and I held her. A 6 weeks passed. Mark went home, confined to a wheelchair. Lena tried to do everything herself, until the stress began to eat her alive. I could see it in her weight loss, her silence, her empty stare. That's when she came to me again. Different this time. I was wrong, she said. About everything. And then, to my shock, she broke down at my feet. I wanted so badly to have a perfect life, to be better than what we had growing up. And when he started turning into something else, I couldn't admit it, not even to myself. I was so ashamed. I pushed you away because I needed someone to blame. I let her cry, not because I had forgotten, but because I had forgiven. As I moved back in, but not as a servant, as her mother, we hired a nurse for Mark. Lena went back to therapy. We began rebuilding, brick by brick, day by day. In the evenings, we'd sit on the porch drinking tea, talking about old movies, dreams, scars. We laughed more, cried less. And one day, out of the blue, she said, You know, Mama, I don't think I ever really knew how strong you were. I just thought you were hard. But now I know. You were surviving for both of us. I looked at her then, not as the girl who broke me, but the woman who was learning to heal. And I smiled, because sometimes love comes back, not as a reward, but as a choice. In the end, I didn't serve her husband. I saved my daughter. And in saving her, I found myself again,